Adolf Hitler plunged the world into chaos, leaving behind millions of dead and a legacy soaked in blood. When he died in his Berlin bunker in 1945, those who shared his blood were left behind, marked, hunted, and cursed. They weren't war criminals, but they carried his name, his face, and his DNA. Some vanished, some lived in shadows, others paid the price in silence. Their connection to Hitler wasn't just a burden, it was a life they could never escape. To understand what happened to Hitler's relatives, we need to see who they were before it. Hitler was born on April 20th, 1889, in the small Austrian town of Braunau am Inn. His father, Alois Hitler Sr., was married 3 times and had children from 2 of those marriages, which made Adolf part of a blended and fragmented family. Alois Sr. was strict and distant, often abusive, and his complicated relationships laid the foundation for a family full of division and instability. From his father's second marriage, Adolf had a half-brother, Alois Hitler Jr., born in 1882. Adolf's only full sibling was Paula Hitler, born on January 21st, 1896. She was quiet and reserved, lived most of her life in Austria and southern Germany, and remained out of the public eye throughout the Nazi years. Despite their distant personalities, she and Adolf maintained some contact into adulthood. Then there was Angela Hitler, born in 1883, Adolf's older half-sister from Alois Sr.'s first marriage. Angela married a civil servant named Leo Raubal and had 3 children, Leo Jr., Elfriede, and Gulli Raubal. By the time Hitler was appointed Chancellor of Germany in 1933, nearly all of his immediate relatives were already well into adulthood and scattered across Germany, Austria, Britain, and Ireland. Some had barely spoken to him in years. The very first tragedy struck before the war even started, when he invited Gulli Raubal, Angela Raubal's daughter, to live with him in Munich, claiming he wanted to supervise her education. It would haunt him forever. Gulli was smart, lively, and confident. In 1929, at just 21 years old, she moved into his luxury apartment at 16 Prinzregentenplatz. Officially, she was enrolled in medical studies. Unofficially, she lived under increasingly tight restrictions. Hitler dictated nearly every part of her daily life, where she went, who she saw, and how she dressed. She wasn't allowed to date without approval. He often had bodyguards accompany her, even on errands. Those around them noticed his possessiveness. Gulli confided in friends that she felt imprisoned. She wanted to move to Vienna and take up singing lessons, but Hitler refused to let her go. The tension between them grew worse over time. Their arguments became more frequent and more intense. On September 18, 1931, Gulli was found dead in Hitler's apartment. She had been shot in the chest with Hitler's Walther pistol. The police investigation concluded it was suicide, but the exact details of her death remained unclear. No suicide note was ever found. The case was closed quickly, but speculation exploded. Some believed she had been physically abused. Others suspected a staged death. The scandal could have ended Hitler's political career, but it didn't. Despite the rumors, no charges were filed, and Nazi officials worked hard to suppress public discussion about the incident. Privately, Hitler was shaken. He canceled political engagements, retreated from public view for several weeks, and traveled alone into the mountains. According to close aides, he kept a portrait of Gulli in every one of his residences, including the Berghof. Her room was left untouched for years. Gulli died just shy of her 24th birthday. She never lived to see her uncle become the dictator of Germany. But her sudden and mysterious death added a dark and deeply personal scar to Hitler's already disturbing legacy, one that would never fully heal. After that, Hitler became more withdrawn and isolated. He began surrounding himself only with those he trusted completely. One of the few family members allowed to remain in his inner circle was Angela. She was older than Adolf by 6 years. In the early 1930s, after her daughter's death, Hitler invited her to work at his newly acquired mountain residence in the Obersalzberg region near Berchtesgaden. The retreat would later become known as the Berghof. Angela served as the housekeeper at the Berghof. She oversaw kitchen operations, managed the cleaning staff, and handled domestic logistics during Hitler's extended stays in the Alps. She was efficient, organized, and for a time one of the few people Hitler seemed to trust without reservation. Visitors and aides often noted her calm, motherly presence in the otherwise tense and highly controlled household. But that trust began to deteriorate as Eva Braun, a young woman working in a Munich photography studio, became more involved in Hitler's private life. Angela deeply disapproved of Eva and didn't hide her feelings. She reportedly saw Eva as immature, shallow, and lacking the class expected in Hitler's increasingly formal social world. Her open disapproval caused repeated conflicts. By 1940, Angela was no longer welcome at the Berghof. Whether she left voluntarily or was pushed out remains unclear, but after her departure, Hitler cut off nearly all contact with her. She returned to Vienna and lived in reduced circumstances, supported by a modest pension from the Nazi Party for a time. When Nazi Germany collapsed in 1945, Angela was no longer connected to the regime, but her last name made her a target. Allied authorities investigated her, though she was not charged with any crimes. Still, her identity alone made her unwelcome in post-war Austria. She lived her final years in obscurity, dependent on family and disconnected from the world she had once been a part of. She died in 1949, aged 66, with no public recognition, no funeral coverage, and no legacy, except her unwanted place in one of history's darkest families. Adolf's half-brother, Alois Hitler Jr., had a strained relationship with the family from early on. He was expelled from multiple schools, often clashed with his strict father, and eventually left home as a teenager. Seeking distance from his family and a fresh start, Alois Jr. moved abroad. In the early 1900s, he settled in Dublin, Ireland, where he worked as a waiter. There, he met an Irish woman, Bridget Dowling, whom he married in 1910. The couple moved to Liverpool, England, and had a son, William Patrick Hitler, in 1911. But domestic life didn't last. Alois Jr. abandoned Bridget and William around 1914, faked his own death, and returned to Germany to start over. In the following years, he remarried and had more children. While his past in England was left behind, he opened and managed small restaurants and taverns, mostly in Berlin, avoiding both family ties and political exposure. Despite sharing the Hitler name, Alois Jr. kept a deliberate distance from Adolf's rise to power. He never joined the Nazi Party and refrained from speaking publicly about his brother. Still, the connection brought him indirect benefits. His businesses weren't bothered, and he enjoyed a level of immunity that others didn't. That changed with Germany's defeat in 1945. After the war, Alois Jr. was arrested by Allied forces and held for questioning. Investigators probed his background, searching for any link to Nazi activities. Though they found none, his last name alone marked him. He was released, but his post-war life was in ruins. Stripped of his reputation, he turned to alcohol and withdrew from public life. He remained in Hamburg, living quietly in declining health and deepening isolation. By the time he died in 1956 at age 74, he was alone, disgraced, and largely forgotten. Only a handful of people attended his funeral. His brother's name was never spoken. While Alois Jr. stayed silent, his son chose a different path. William Patrick's childhood was marked by instability and estrangement after his father abandoned the family. But as Hitler rose to power in the 1930s, William became curious about the uncle whose name was suddenly known around the world. He traveled to Germany and met Adolf Hitler in person. Hoping to benefit from the connection, he asked for work. Hitler gave him a few temporary jobs, but distrusted him from the beginning. Behind closed doors, he called William a blackmailer and an embarrassment. When William pushed too hard for a better position, Hitler threatened to revoke his German passport, trapping him in the Reich. William escaped just in time, returning to England in 1938. Then he made a bold move. In 1939, he gave an interview to Look magazine titled, "Why I Hate My Uncle." When the war began, William didn't just speak out. He enlisted. After being rejected several times due to his last name, President Roosevelt personally approved his request. In 1944, William joined the U.S. Navy as a hospital corpsman. He served in combat zones, tended to wounded soldiers, and was later awarded the Purple Heart. His military record was clean and commendable. After the war, he legally changed his name to Stuart Houston and disappeared from the spotlight. He married and had 4 sons: Alexander Adolf, Louis, Brian, and Howard Stuart Houston. To protect them from public scrutiny, William raised them with different last names and strict instructions to never speak about the family's past. Their neighbors believed they were just another working-class family. The boys attended local schools, played in the yard, and blended in completely. But behind the curtains, their lives were shaped by one unspoken truth. None of them ever discussed their infamous ancestry publicly. Even as adults, they kept low profiles. Alexander, the eldest, pursued a career as a social worker, dedicating his life to helping others in the very country that had fought against his uncle. Brian operated a landscaping business, rarely venturing outside his routine. Louis avoided the media altogether and stayed almost entirely out of public records. Howard, the youngest, died in a car crash in 1989 at the age of 32. As the decades passed, whispers began to emerge, unconfirmed but persistent. Some former acquaintances claimed the brothers had once made a pact to never marry, to never have children, and to end the bloodline of Adolf Hitler with themselves. Whether this agreement was ever formally spoken or simply understood among them remains unclear. But what is known is that none of the 4 ever married, and none had children. By the early 2000s, Howard, Brian, and Louis had all passed away. Only Alexander remained, living in total seclusion. He declined all interview requests. No recent photographs of him exist in the public domain. He has no known social presence, no memoir, and no comment on the legacy that defined his life from birth. If the rumored pact was true, then with the passing of these 4 men, the direct male bloodline of Adolf Hitler has quietly, deliberately ended in silence. However, though Adolf's full sister Paula led a quiet and isolated life for a while, she never regretted being part of the Hitler family. She worked modest jobs, first as a secretary at an insurance company, then in various office roles, living mostly in Austria while Hitler rose to power in Germany. To avoid attention, she adopted the surname Wolf, the same alias Adolf sometimes used in private. Though she maintained personal contact with him, she never joined the Nazi Party, never appeared in public alongside him, and held no political or official role in his regime. When the Third Reich collapsed, Paula was arrested by American forces in May 1945 and interrogated in Berchtesgaden. She denied any knowledge of the Holocaust, claiming she was unaware of her brother's crimes or the scale of Nazi atrocities. The Allies found no evidence linking her to any part of the regime's operations, and she was released after several months. She quietly moved to Berchtesgaden, the same region where Hitler had owned his mountain retreat, and lived under the radar. In 1957, she broke her silence with a rare interview with a German journalist, in which she portrayed Adolf not as a monster, but as a misunderstood man. Her comments, especially her denial of guilt or blame, stunned post-war Germany. She died in 1960 at the age of 64. She was buried under the name Paula Wolf in a simple grave near Berchtesgaden. There was no ceremony, no media coverage, and no visitors. The last living sibling of Adolf Hitler disappeared into history, alone, obscure, and still denying everything. By the 1950s, Adolf Hitler was dead, the Nazi regime dismantled, and Germany divided. But for his extended family, the burden of his name had only just begun. In both Austria and Germany, distant cousins, some related through his father Alois's side, others through the maternal line, were identified by local officials and tracked by post-war media. Most had never even met Hitler. They had no political ties, no involvement in the Nazi Party, and had lived ordinary lives before and during the war. Still, suspicion clung to them. Journalists published their names. Neighbors whispered. Employers rejected them outright once their identity was discovered. Being related to Hitler, no matter how distant, was enough to ruin any future. Several cousins took drastic steps to disappear. One reportedly escaped to Brazil under a false identity. Another relative, last seen in Spain, vanished entirely. A few altered their surnames, hoping to slip into civilian life unnoticed. It rarely worked. They weren't interrogated and they weren't arrested, but they were exiled by association, socially and economically. Their family history was a shadow that never lifted. Out of fear or shame, none of them ever gave public interviews or wrote memoirs. They chose silence over scandal. As the biological line of Adolf Hitler quietly disappeared, the physical remnants of his family stirred new tensions, especially their graves. In the quiet town of Leonding, Austria, just outside Linz, one small cemetery drew international attention. This was where Adolf Hitler's parents, Alois Hitler Sr. and Clara Hitler, had been buried side by side for over a century. Their modest grave, marked by a simple headstone, sat in a peaceful Catholic cemetery surrounded by ordinary local families. But by the late 20th century, the site had taken on a new identity. Neo-Nazis from across Europe began making pilgrimages to the grave, treating it as a shrine. They left flowers, lit candles, and took photos posing beside the tombstone. Some went further, giving Nazi salutes, or leaving symbols linked to Hitler's regime. It became a gathering point for extremist sympathy, completely against the will of the community. The residents of Leonding were outraged. The town had no interest in becoming a destination for hate groups. Many called on local authorities and the Catholic Church, which managed the cemetery, to take action. In 2012, after growing concern and repeated complaints, the Catholic Church made a final decision. With the consent of a distant relative who still held burial rights, they removed the headstone. The graves of Alois and Clara remained in place, but the site was left unmarked. No plaque, no name, nothing to indicate who lay beneath. It was an effort to erase any symbolic power the site had gained. Across Germany, similar measures were quietly carried out. Graves belonging to extended members of Hitler's family were either vandalized by anti-fascists or hidden by local officials. Some cemeteries removed signage, others relocated remains discreetly to avoid attracting attention. Even in death, Hitler's name poisoned the ground it touched. His relatives, many of whom had no role in his crimes, could not escape the shadow he cast. In 2010, Belgian journalist Jean-Paul Mulders, along with German historian Mark Vermeeren, collected DNA from living descendants of Hitler's paternal side. Most were from the United States and Austria. Using items like used napkins and cigarette butts, Mulder and his team extracted the DNA without direct consent, aiming to analyze the Y chromosome passed virtually unchanged from father to son. If Hitler had descendants through his paternal line, their Y DNA would be identical to his. What came back was unexpected. The samples contained a rare haplogroup known as E1b1b, specifically EM35, which is found at higher frequencies among Jewish populations, particularly Ashkenazi and Sephardic Jews, as well as in parts of North Africa. This lineage is relatively uncommon in Western Europe, especially in Germany and Austria. The findings didn't prove Hitler had Jewish ancestry. DNA can't pinpoint religion, and the presence of E1B1B alone isn't conclusive. But it did raise serious questions. The idea that Hitler, who orchestrated the Holocaust and sought to exterminate Jews from Europe, might share a genetic marker commonly found in Jewish populations was deeply unsettling. For historians, it reignited old debates. Some had long speculated about the identity of Hitler's paternal grandfather, whom Hitler himself never named. His father, Alois, was born out of wedlock, and rumors swirled that he may have had Jewish roots, a theory never confirmed. But for Hitler's surviving relatives, the DNA test did more than stir controversy. It shattered the fragile anonymity they had worked so hard to maintain. The publication of the test results dragged them back into the public eye. Reports suggested that some family members went completely off-grid, disappearing from public records to avoid further exposure. Others reportedly hired lawyers or refused any comment, maintaining strict silence. What science had revealed, history had only hinted at. And for a man whose regime was obsessed with racial purity, the idea of potentially Jewish ancestry was more than ironic. It was a brutal twist.